Agree with that. Anyone do anything fun over the 4th?
Oh, when was that? 2 weeks ago?
So much has happened since last.
I know, seriously.
It's been a while.
I'm 1 minute, so I can't remember.
All right, well, we have quorum, so that's a good start. Give everyone another minute. Probably hit 5:30.
How was the festival this weekend? Anyone go?
I didn't attend.
It's too hot.
All right, it is 5:30 and we've got another full agenda. First of all, I just want to start by thanking everybody. I know our original commitment had been to wrap up at the end of June, but thank you for your dedication to staying with this group through the very end and adding on these 3 additional summer meetings. Really appreciate your service and work on this. And just a couple reminders, we are recording as well as live streaming this meeting. And then if you wouldn't mind raising your hand before speaking to help with the crosstalk and make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. And that can be found in the reactions button down at the bottom, and there's a little button that says raise hand. So where we left off last time was right at the end of our elected officials discussion. So we've talked a lot about how elected officials are selected, what their terms look like, how they may be automatically removed from office, how council as a body can remove a councilor from office. And our last question really has to do with how the electorate can remove or may remove an elected official from office. So there is provision in state law for this question. Does the committee recommend continuing to defer to state law on the recall process for an elected official? And I know we sent you the document that has the manual of how a recall happens, but in case you didn't read that very long document, there was a couple things in there that were really important. One is that a recall can be made anytime after an elected official has served 6 months of their elected term. And the second is that in order to do a recall, you need to have so many signatures. In Oregon, for an elected official, it is 15% of the number of voters who voted in the last governor's election. So that's a very specific calculation number. Shelby and I did some math, and in Tigard, it's usually somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 voters would be required. 3,500 to 5,000 signatures would be required to initiate a petition for recall. All right, any questions about what the state process looks like as already designed for recall? Okay. So the question for this group this evening is that good? Is that fine? Are we comfortable with continuing to defer to the quite robust, really, state law impact? Does anyone have any thoughts you'd like to share? Is everyone good with deferring to state law? Okay. Great. Is there anyone who does not want to continue to defer to state law? Great. Let's move on to city officials. So that wraps up our conversation around elected officials. So we've covered how elected officials may remove, or how the body of councilors, for that no interference clause, it's the only way that that body can remove one of their members. Then we talked about how councilor may be automatically removed, and now we've covered how the electorate may remove a councilor or mayor. Karen, please.
Yeah, I feel like I missed something because I thought we talked about how councilors or mayor could be automatically deemed vacancies, but I didn't think we did cover how they could be removed, like by a vote of the council or.
We covered it in two ways. We went a little out of order, but there was one, we talked about the no interference clause. And so that is a way that council as a body can remove one of their members. And then the second way we talked about it had to do with basically absentia of duty. And then this group didn't come to consensus around that particular removal. So we deferred that to council. But if there is another method that you would like to discuss about our criteria that could lead to council removing one of its membership, floor is yours.
I don't know that I had one. I just, because the Beaverton charter talked about that the council could remove someone they had 5 different ways. And some of those we put into the automatic vacancy. That wouldn't have to be voted on, it would just be deemed a vacancy. But they did put in the yeah, see, I don't remember us talking about the council removing someone if they were MIA. But then the other one that was in there was coerces the city manager in violation of section 3.4. And
so we talked about the MIA actually for about an hour.
And that's what we didn't come to consensus on. Is that why
that's why we didn't come, that's the one we didn't come to consensus on. And then we did include the coerces the city manager. We actually made it much more broad and coerces or interferes in city business with any city employee. Could cause council to elect to remove one of their members.
See, and I thought that's what we came up with. Oh shoot. Censure or removal from committee. I didn't think that we actually is the language for the coercion already in a draft that
Yes.
I just need to look at?
Yes.
Okay,
And
I will do that.
yeah, we did decide that coercing, interfering could lead to removal from office. But I think what you're thinking of is that we also talked about violating the ground rules could lead to censure or removal from committees, and it could not lead to removal from office. So that is a distinction that's in there. So moving on to city officials. So currently the Tigard City Charter has 5 city officials who are named in the charter. It is the city manager, the municipal judge, financial officer, and the recorder. I think it's like 4 that are named by name. Looking around at other charters, city manager and municipal judge are required. Those ones are always included, at least in this form of government. And it's interesting because the municipal judge passage does 2 things. One establishes the municipal judge as an officer of the city, but it also establishes the municipal court of Tigard. And we can talk about that in a little more detail. The recommendation that Shelby and I sent out to you last Thursday essentially says that we are thinking that it makes the most sense to include in the charter the positions that report directly to council. So those would be 3 positions. It would be the city manager, the city attorney, and the municipal judge. And so the first question to this group is, are those the appropriate officials to include in the charter? Or are there others? Or would you like to really, I mean, we have to include the city manager and the municipal judge, but if you felt strongly about not including the city attorney, that would be something to discuss. And Jason, please.
Just clarification at this point on the city recorder has actually been, I would say, during my time on council, the most confusing one to me, because I think the way we've acted as in the city recorder reported to the council, but they don't really, but they kind of do on some things. Did you and Shelby talk about that specifically, or how, like, where should that one land? And I guess, Carol, that's a big question, but I just think the city recorder should probably be in this discussion too, like not just herself, but the whole topic.
Yeah, Shelby, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we did talk about really reporting structure as being the most relevant, because we talked about, kind of, as you noted, the confusion of having a position in the charter that then for performance evaluations and everything that goes along with a supervisory role or a management role, it does really muddy the waters if the person is in the charter as being appointed by council, but is managed by somebody else. And so, so we really looked at what is consistent with what other cities have done and focused just on those 3 as the most common that report to city council directly.
And there's no requirement that like the elections official or, okay.
Nope.
Thank you, Shelby.
No.
Carol, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's not in a lot of city charters. We need to have one. And so that, I don't think that it takes away from the recorder position, no matter who they report to. The reality is you do report to in most places, and certainly in Tigard, to the city manager. But you are appointed by resolution by the council. So it is a little confusing. You work for everyone, but really your day-to-day management is the city manager. So that does make sense.
Thank you, Carol. And Margaret, please.
Actually, I was going to be talking about the municipal judge. And so is there more discussion on the recorder?
Let's continue the discussion on the recorder, and then we can go position by position.
Yeah. Thank you.
John, please.
Yeah, it was when Carol was appointed, or actually moved up. I actually was on the interview process because there was that confusion, and should the mayor or the council be involved in that? So I remember all that, and I agree with Jason. It was very confusing over the years. I think what the main thing is a lot of cities don't have a city manager or a city administrator, and the city recorder is actually the person that is the main person of communication with all the cities, because every city is required to have one of those. And so it's actually, the reason it's still in ours is because that's the way it started. Mm-hmm. And then we went from there, we added the city administrator, and then there was the big vote and confusion over the years where we changed it from city administrator to city manager. So we took the term city administrator out. So the city recorder is still sitting in there because that's the way smaller cities do it.
John, thank you as always for the historical perspective. So those are the positions that we were recommending to remove: the financial officer and the recorder. Does anyone have an issue with removing those 2 positions, as they do not report directly to the council? Does anyone feels? Oh, Nathan, please.
I guess just a double check question, follow-up question. The only thing that made me a little nervous about recorder was, well, A, I didn't have some of the information that we just got, but B, that the recorder is specifically mentioned elsewhere in the charter, but doesn't seem to be required in the charter to be hired or appointed or whatever. And I just didn't know if there was any possible world in which we weren't required to have a recorder, but there are certain duties that a recorder has to do, and that creates weird confusion.
Shelby?
Yeah, so I think the city attorney example is a good one because the city attorney has not been in our charter ever, but we've always had one, whether it's been a firm or whether it's been me. And so just because it's in the charter, I want to separate that from whether the position actually exists or not, because whether it's in the charter or not has really no bearing on the existence of the office. And so you're right that the recorder does appear elsewhere in terms of responsibilities to the city council and to the city. And so not having it in the charter doesn't minimize the importance of that role or in any way say that that role doesn't exist. It's really just the way we looked at it was really just reporting structure.
Zachary, please.
So let's say we were to get rid of these positions and it were to change the structure of the government a bit. Who would be voting on changing up the responsibilities? Would it be us too? Or would it also be like just city?
So we're not going to remove any positions from the city. We are only removing their being in the charter. So like the city recorder will still exist and still have basically the same job duties. It just won't be in the charter anymore. Same with having financial and budget officers that are.
Okay, so just make it optional instead of required and then up for debate, whereas before it wasn't.
It's more just trying to make the charter reflect like the top line of the city. Not that these positions are in any way optional. Like it's not optional really to have a city engineer, but that's not a charter position.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone feel strongly about keeping these positions in the charter? Okay. Then let's start moving through position by position. So why don't we start with the order that I have them in this slideshow. So we have the city manager. So we have crafted this job description that is largely in line with what other cities have put in their charter about what the city manager's position is. Something that we considered quite a bit is trying to future-proof this, so not get too much into the weeds on how the city manager affects their position, but what kind of like those top line roles and responsibilities are. And I like to keep this group away from kind of fiddling with specifics of the language, but more talking if there's a concept that is missing or a concept that you would like removed. So when we talk about the city manager, we talk about it as being the administrative head of the city, responsible specifically to the city council for proper leadership and administration of all city business. And then that includes serving as the budget officer. Within the city manager's role, they appoint and remove all city employees, except, and these are the two that are provided for in the charter, the municipal judge and city attorney. They organize departments and carry out all city policies, resolutions, and ordinances. And Jason, please.
I would just say on this one, the word that seems to be missing from my perspective is the actual operations of the city. And I would suggest that maybe the simplest way to get that concept in there would be, and at the end, have the last part after the semicolon read, and carrying out all city operations, comma, policies, comma, resolutions, comma, and ordinances.
Okay.
To me, it's just not clear. Like when I read this, I don't see anything that jumps out at me as like they're the person responsible for operating the city. And I think they are. In fact, that might be their most important responsibility.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. John, please.
Yeah, I like that because as Nathan always points out, people don't realize, I think the mayor runs the city. And by stating it in the charter that the city administrator does, city manager does, I think that's very important. The other thing I like is the part that we put in there, we took out the finance officer, and by putting the city manager was the finance officer. People always thought that, the VP of finance or whoever the finance director was the finance officer. But by combining it into the city manager, I think it makes a lot more sense than having the finance officer separately. So I like that aspect.
Thank you, John. So I've heard one recommendation to include some emphasis around that the city manager is responsible for the operations of the city. Any other concepts that might be missing from this description? Does everyone agree with adding the concept of being responsible for the operations of the city?
Mhm.
Awesome. All right, moving on. Margaret, I'm going to call on you first because you've already discussed this. So municipal judge. So like I said, this clause does two things in that it both sets up the role of municipal judge as an officer, but it also establishes the court. And one piece that Shelby pointed out to me actually just before this meeting got started that I hadn't realized is that our municipal court does not actually see misdemeanors, but we do include that within the jurisdiction of the court as part of that future proofing as the city may grow or may change how the court operates, that we have that kind of protected within our charter. So Margaret can start us off.
Okay. I guess the only question I had basically dealt with what the municipal judge's responsibility is to the council. And I would assume that if they're under the charter, I mean, we know that they go through and literally rule on city regulations and that kind of thing. But what is their responsibility to the council? Do they pretty much just go through and just update them on what's going on or whatever? What is the reporting system from the municipal judge to the city council?
That's a great question. John, I saw you unmute. If you'd like to take it.
Well, I was going to say they do come annually and tell us updates on different trends and where they see maybe needing some maybe new rules or ordinances. So they do that, but mainly they don't really report to us. We just appoint them. So from that standpoint, we really don't set their rules or directions. That's all based on state law or city law. So from that, we really don't do a lot to control them. All we can do is appoint somebody new. So I don't know if Jason had anything different, but over the years, it's always been pretty, they've always done a great job. I appreciate everybody that's ever done it. And we've always had backups and secondary people. And I've always been very impressed on how they do. And I know we've changed some over the years by adding like red light camera and other things along that put more things into it. But I'll let Jason talk now.
I think it's really important to remember that there's the separation of church and state, separation of parts of the government here, and and keeping the, at least I thought that was really important, like keeping the separation of the judicial branch, which is really the judge in this case, and our court, from the legislative, really city council part of the organization. And so the way I think we've really looked at it is like, is the judge still meeting the needs of our community? That's like the main question that the council would sort of ask themselves. And if the answer was yes, and they were sort of administering the law as needed in the city, then that was the standard or something like that, and not getting into a lot more detail about how they're doing their job or anything else, because that was just not, that would essentially be like, Congress at the federal level deciding whether the Supreme Court's doing their job every day or not. And that's just not the role in the separation of powers from my perspective. So that's all I would add. Sorry, I was so verbose.
Oh, thanks, Jason. Margaret, do you have a follow-up?
No, just what it was is I appreciated John's explanation of it, because I think what it is I can see if there's something that's really going on in the city that needs maybe a policy decision or a regulation, then it would be kind of an appointed. But I think John answered my question.
Great, thank you.
So I can kind of give an example. Jason mentioned photo red light, and I think that's a good example because that was a situation where the council set the direction that we wanted to pursue photo red light as a city. But we obviously need the involvement of the court in order to implement that, in order to figure out how we're going to run those cases. And so there was a lot of close collaboration, but definitely, as Jason said, there's still two separate branches of government, essentially. And so there's a cross, there's an intersection, but not, council never says this is how you're going to rule on these cases. It's more of how do we set the big policy and take the city forward.
Thanks, Shelby. Karen, please.
Yeah, I'm thrown by paragraph B because we've shifted to talk about judges plural and a presiding judge. And is one judge appointed or is a presiding judge appointed, and then there's other judges in the court? I was thrown by paragraph B.
Great question.
Yeah. So we do have, so right now we have one judge and at least one, maybe two judges pro tem. And so essentially the judge needs somebody to step in for her when she's on vacation or otherwise out of the office. And so the presiding judge or our main judge is the only city employee who's employed full-time by the city, but we do have by contract judges pro tem who serve also.
So the main judge would be the person who is the municipal judge that is in the charter, and then they would be supervising the judges pro tem. Does that answer your question, Karen?
It still seems like the language could be more clear then. Just since the municipal judge and the presiding judge are the same thing. It just seemed odd just to come up with another name. But I understand that. And then the municipal judge that has been appointed is the person who can bring in other judges, has the power to bring in the other judges to help as needed.
Yeah, we can clarify that also to address pro tem judges versus presiding judge or other judges. That's a good point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. If it was confusing to you, it's going to be confusing to someone else 5 years from now, so I appreciate it. Okay, any other comments about the municipal judge? Okay, moving on. Let's talk about the city attorney. Oh, more questions about the municipal judge. Tony, please go ahead.
I just had a quick question along Karen's line. Is there a circumstance where there could be more than one municipal judge appointed, and then there'd be a hierarchy of municipal judges with one being more? Could there potentially also, as we move forward and say the city, grew by tenfold, could there be a need for more than one mutual judge, or a municipal judge?
In theory, yes. I mean, if the city grows hugely, yes. I'm not aware of whether other cities have multiple judges on staff. It's my experience that it's generally just one. And then other judges, I know that there are several judges by contract that kind of act as pro tem like we have. That's kind of a niche for in the municipal judge attorney world. But we can double check that and run that by our own municipal judge and see if she ever could foresee a situation like that.
Thank you, Tony. And Zachary, please.
So I have a question about places with unincorporated, like Tigard Islands,
And is your question about what jurisdiction of judiciary they fall under?
Yeah, like, is there, like, how would Tigard go to reunify that sort of like pocket of unincorporated Tigard if they have their own association? Would they contact them and then do it, or could they just do it with law?
Sorry, is your question, how do annexations happen? Like,
Yeah,
how,
like
how does the city annex?
incorporated spots, yeah.
That is a very good question that is very outside our current topic of.
Okay,
municipal
yeah,
judge. But we can definitely talk to you about that offline.
okay. Yeah, because I was just saying, because with municipal judges, I was wondering if the municipal judge has the power to, once the charter is changed, just kind of vote if that's right or wrong, sort of along those lines, and then kind of annex spots.
No, yeah, no, annexation is a
The whole
very
new-
big, whole other topic that has a whole lot of rules and stuff around it.
Yeah, I know. I have so many questions. I just thought I'd wonder, because if only there was one municipal judge, I'd be like, oh, wouldn't it be a conflict of interest? Because if they're voting on things like that, and then there's only one person deciding, then
No,
Yeah.
so literally the role of the municipal court judge is mainly in Tigard right now, it's mainly traffic and code enforcement. So the
Oh.
municipal court judge has zero authority over over anything to do with annexation, like you were saying, and really anything to do with the powers of the city, anything about whether the city council is doing something wrong or the city government is doing something right or wrong. Any of that would be a circuit court judge, well outside the scope of the municipal judge.
Thank you, Shelby. John, please.
Yeah, Kim, you might want to put on our agenda if we've ever got 5 minutes here or there. Sometimes we do. Actually, it's a good topic, and it is related to the charter, I feel. And I know there's state law that comes involved, and it does change quite often, but I think it would be a good point for everybody here to understand.
And the topic you mean is annexations.
Correct.
And you said in 5 minutes, is that right?
John, I appreciate that. And if we can find time, but we have 2.5 meetings left. So we'll see what we can do. Zena, please.
So I see that currently the judges, they work on the traffic violation and the misdemeanor. So is there in the future chances that, they will do extra other legal stuff?
Yes. And Shelby, go ahead.
Yeah, so expanding to misdemeanors would actually be a future situation from what we do now. So we have the ability to hear criminal misdemeanors, but our court is not set up for that. So we would need to be a court of record, which requires certain, as the name suggests, record keeping and processes, and we don't have that in place. We also just don't have the capacity right now in terms of staff or a prosecutor to do that. And so, as Kim said in the beginning, we want to keep the potential jurisdiction in our charter so that if that's something that the council pursues in the future, we don't have any conflicts with our charter, but we currently don't do any criminal work in our court right now. And yeah, we have an expert in our court, it's Holly.
Holly, go ahead. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. So I don't know if this is the right time to mention this, but since this also talks about establishing the court, the municipal court of the city of Tigard, Washington County, Oregon, we always say Tigard Municipal Court. All of our documents say Tigard Municipal Court. Is that something that can be changed to go with what we're commonly called and known as? And is this the place to do it? I didn't want to let it go and miss that chance, because even like the judge's memos to council all say Tigard Municipal Court. Our note cards or our business cards say Tigard Municipal Court. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't know if this is the right time, but there it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. We can definitely do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Holly. Tony, please.
Is there any reason to or not to extend it into felonies also? If we're bringing in misdemeanors, is there a reason why it stops at misdemeanor? Because it kind of seems like, this isn't my area of expertise, but it kind of seems like if you're bringing in a prosecutor and the record keeping that would cover misdemeanors, wouldn't that be similar to the kinds of records and processes you need to have for something stronger than a misdemeanor?
So those are all prosecuted by the district attorney in circuit court. And so cities do have limited ability to take misdemeanor jurisdiction, but felony jurisdiction is going to be the district attorney.
Great question. All right. Any last comments, questions about the municipal judge? Jason, please.
I was just going to make this real for Tony and others that may be wondering what that looks like. I think the city of Beaverton right now prosecutes a limited number of misdemeanor DUIs, and that's the only thing that's not traffic and sort of other and code stuff. So just so you kind of have a sense of what a city in our area that's maybe a bit bigger might be doing in this space, that's what it would look like, is sort of prosecuting low level, more minor misdemeanors.
Thanks, Jason. All right, moving on to the city attorney. Luckily, we have one in our room. And so this would be an add into the charter. Again, this is because the city attorney reports directly to council. City attorney would be the chief legal officer for the city. They must be this is similar to the municipal judge requirement that they be a member in good standing with the Oregon Bar. And then the city attorney would appoint, manage, and remove employees who work in and for the city attorney's office. As you may be aware, the city attorney's office right now is one singular person. But again, talking about future proofing this as the city grows, it would not be unusual to have more than one person working in the city attorney's office. Tony, please.
So does this language create a potential conflict with the city manager? Because it sounds like the city manager is in charge of all of the city employees, kind of but then not in the city attorney's office, or would it be like shared authority, or how would that process work?
Shelby, go ahead.
Yeah, so because, well, it would be consistent with charter. It would be the way it would work. And so it would clarify that it is the role of the city attorney versus council versus the city manager. So this was language consistent with a lot of other cities. Like Kim said, it's never come up in Tigard before because it's never been an issue before. We don't have anybody else. And so this was something where we borrowed from other cities. So certainly I'm open to feedback on this one.
I think essentially how this would set it up is that the city council would oversee the city manager, who would oversee nearly every employee, and then you would have the city attorney who's specifically overseeing anyone in the city attorney's office separately from the city manager. John, please.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that they can't use shared employees. That might fall under the other purview. So that's what most other cities do. And I know Shelby uses other staff members that are part of that chain, but the city manager does not oversee the city attorney, only the council does. And the idea that, back to Jason's separation that we were talking about earlier, is there's quite a bit of controversy in other cities locally to us that relate to who can control them and who can hire and fire them. And I think having it in the charter is very important. Because having it be under the role of the council, I think it's very important, and have it not be under the city manager. I just won't mention West Lynn, but there are other ones that very major issues related to this.
John, that's a good point about the shared employee. I mean, I work in the city manager's office, but clearly I work very closely with Shelby on this project. Jason, please.
I'm just thinking about how to deal with all that. I think maybe there should be just the way to simply resolve this is to make a clear distinction, and then make a clear distinction about the job functions they're doing. And I assume each person has a direct supervisor. I hope we don't have people that have two direct supervisors. And I would just go with whatever the direct line of sight supervisor is as the controlling, like, is it the city manager or the city attorney's responsibility on a particular employee, and just keep it simple, even if there are shared Because I think that gets at the issue, which is that people that are working wholly or entirely or primarily in the city attorney's office should not be being managed or dealt with directly or fired by the city manager. And I think that would deal with that.
Yeah, that's an excellent clarification. Thank you, Jason. Tony, were you just going to offer the same point? I saw you put your hand back down.
It was just kind of that clarification in the city manager's language where it might specifically say that has no authority over the attorney's office, or even kind of that point of shared employees. It would be, if the attorney's office and the city attorney and the city manager share an employee, and the city manager decides that they hate the employee and fire them, and the city attorney actually needs that person to perform tasks, how do they prevent that or get that back and create that kind of that conflict kind of?
Excellent point. Yeah, we can make a clear distinction. I think you might be right that the better place to do that is in the city manager description. But yeah, thank you. Any other comments about city attorney? Okay, so we kind of skated by it, but there is this other overview that we had written and sent in the materials. I think this is in line a lot with what we discussed today. This would go in front of the 3 descriptions, basically saying that the charter establishes these 3 city offices that can be appointed and removed by a majority of council. So city manager, city attorney, and the municipal court judge. And then it also provides a provision that the council may combine any 2 or more appointed city offices. This does not really apply to a city that's kind of gotten to the size of Tigard, but again, talking about future proofing, and this is a very common provision in other city charters. And then this is a restatement of kind of the no interference clause. We thought it was important still to state here, and this is also in line with a lot of other city charters saying that no member of council may assign or direct the work of any of the following offices. And that's that council as a whole directs the work of these offices, not councilors individually. And John, please.
I think you're confusing the public when you say this charter establishes these 3 officers and 2 or more people could be the same person. I'm not thinking of Tigard shrinking. And so from that standpoint, I know we're trying to make it very generic, but I don't see a city manager and a city attorney being the same person. And I clearly don't see a city manager and a municipal judge being the same person. Now, maybe you could swing it being a city attorney and municipal judge would be the only way I would possibly think about it. But I think we're confusing to have that line in there. I think that line related to when we had a finance officer, when we had a city manager, when we had a recorder. Yeah, cities only had 1 person and they were all those people. So I really don't like that sentence in there at all.
That's a great point, John. Thank you. Jason.
I had basically the same point. I actually think that's in conflict of, I don't think we can operate a city even close to the size of Tigard's without a separate city manager, city attorney, and a municipal court judge. And I frankly think there are internal conflicts, significant ones, that cause all kinds of problems if the same person is trying to do more than one of those roles. So it's not exactly a separation of powers problem, but it is almost headed there in many ways. And so I would just remove that. And I just don't think it has any place in our charter currently.
Sounds good. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, I was just confused because I thought that they should all be separate positions because they all seem like pretty high management positions in the city, and to have 2 or 3 of those positions run under 1 person seems like a conflict of interest in the government.
So I'm hearing that we unanimously do not want this sentence in the charter and that we should take it out. Yeah. Awesome. We will take that out. Tony, please.
Just for those other positions that aren't going to be mentioned in the charter, like the reporter and any other number that the city council might appoint, is there any reason why, or any other language somewhere else in the charter that would prevent the city council from saying, hey, you're the city reporter and you're the head of traffic cones or whatever, whatever the city council might have another position that would necessitate including language that says that appointed offices need to be able to be combined? Because I don't see any limitation on that.
Right,
No.
so
Okay.
the clarifying point there is that the city council doesn't appoint any other officers. So those are any other position besides the three mentioned here are just appointed solely by a city manager. And that doesn't mean that city council has no involvement, especially for public facing offices like the police chief or a position like that, or a city recorder, where council is absolutely involved in the interview process and the selection process, and council can weigh in. But at the end of the day, it's the city manager who actually hires and fires that person.
And so Tony, this also doesn't preclude the city from deciding to combine any positions in a way that makes sense. Any other questions about this overview? Definitely removing that sentence. Got that in the notes. Okay, we are racing through our agenda today, but that's okay because Shelby and I developed our backup plan in case this happened, which is to talk about the preamble. So the genesis for the idea to even have a preamble in Tigard's charter, because the charter does not have one, really came from those interviews that I did with each of you way back in December, where we talked about kind of what you wanted to see in the charter. One thing that came up from a lot of folks in this room was wanting to see the city's values kind of explicitly laid out within a charter document. And as I think we've gone through this process, you've seen more and more that while you can implicitly kind of set out like these are what the values are of the city and set policy or set charter provisions around that, there isn't a good place to explicitly say that except within perhaps a preamble. So preambles in charters or constitutions serve a couple of different purposes. They can just be the straight just introduction to the charter. It can be, like I just discussed, an opportunity to explicitly include values in a charter, and can also be used to claim things like home rule, which we'll see in Beaverton's charter. So just a couple examples. I think at least one of these is going to be very familiar to this group. The preamble to the US Constitution. So this is kind of the premier example of setting out what the values are, what the Constitution is trying to get towards within this set of rules and regulations that it sets up in its articles. So it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. So it sets up, these are the things that we are trying to establish within our Constitution and the values that we choose to uphold. Another example is the Oregon Constitution, much smaller, shorter version, but still gets to this values concept. We the people, the state of Oregon, to the end that justice be established, order maintained, and liberty perpetuated, do ordain this Constitution. So it sets up these three concepts of justice, order, and liberty as being some of the core values for Oregon. And I don't know if you've read the Oregon Constitution. I've never read the Oregon Constitution, but I was looking at the preamble, and it's interesting in the way that it's set up. I think we're more familiar with the US Constitution, where it kind of goes into the articles that establish like here's who's in Senate and here's who's in Congress. The Oregon Constitution actually starts with a Bill of Rights, whereas in our US Constitution, that's nearer to the end. Interesting fun fact for the night. And then the preamble of Beaverton, which does really the third of this concept. So it's really trying to establish these are the rights that the city of Beaverton is claiming, and says that we, the voters of the city of Beaverton, Oregon, exercise our power to the fullest extent possible under the constitutions and laws of the state of Oregon and enact this home rule charter. So really explicitly stating that we are a home rule city within the state of Oregon. So looking at those three examples, knowing that this group kind of had wanted to say some things about values, are there things within these that speak to you, that you would like to see included, that you think are important? Thinking again about the long-term future, 70 years from now, we're all in sort of Zoom meetings. We've got little holograms of each other, like in a little amphitheater in front of us in some way, trying to talk through these. What are things that we want to establish? Zachary, please.
I kind of like the voters one with Beaverton because it seemed more like powerful in terms of not just we the people, but like we the people that vote, because it's like you should vote because you should be more involved in how our government's decided. Whereas that just like we the people, like it's meant for all, but it really like kind of pushes to all who read it, hey, like, you know, I should vote too, so I should be part of that rather than just kind of leaving it there, you know.
Thanks, Zachary. Anything else that stuck out to anyone as something that felt powerful, something they wanted included? Jeanette, please.
Sorry, I'm in an area that's not well lit. I think they're very broad, and I know that part of the intent was to get more narrow, but I'm a little concerned given, obviously, this goes before the voters, and I don't know how many times, you know, the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years, it'll go before the voters again, and those values can change. And I like the idea that we have a full website, we have communication tools that can better drill down on our values and highlight them. And both the Constitution, I think Beaverton and the state of Oregon are pretty broad. So I mean, if we want to do broad, then it might make sense. But if we really want to hone down, which I think this group had initially thought to do, hone down in the values, just seems to make more sense because they can stay livable and actionable if it's more in kind of your communication and website. That's just in my initial thoughts.
Yeah, so basically you're talking about there's a tension there between being too specific and values just kind of changing over time versus being too broad, and then it just kind of loses meaning in general.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you. And that was much more synthesized.
Trying to make sure I'm understanding what's going on. Thank you very much. Tony, please.
Is there any advantage to Beaverton's model kind of explicitly stating that this is a home rule city, that we're claiming these powers and these things? Because I remember us kind of talking about that elsewhere in the charter. And so is there something? It seems to me that there may be some sort of merit to having legalese at the front that establishes the power and the authority of the city in kind of a blanket statement.
Shelby, you're nodding.
Yes, I was just going to go back and see where else in the charter we've put it. But yes, I definitely don't see a disadvantage to doing that. It's under Oregon law, cities are home rule. And so I don't think in the absence of saying that we significantly disadvantage ourselves, but absolutely I see no negative, I see no downside to including it.
Thanks, Shelby. John, please.
Yeah, I agree wholly with what Zachary said. And I think Jeanette's point of things change over time. We want this to be a little timeless, so I wouldn't put too many other values in it right now. But I think stating home rule is the most important thing. Every time we go down to Salem to lobby, the words we say the most are home rule, home rule, home rule. And any time we can have a document that states that, I think it only helps our position. And I think that, you know, it's different than other states. And I think people don't understand that, the difference between home rule or even counties. Some counties in Oregon are home rule, but not all of them are, but all of our cities are. So I think that's the thing is I think it needs to be in there because I think it helps us promote it in the state. And I think it helps people understand what kind of form of government we are. And not all forms of government in Oregon are that way.
Thank you, John. Jason, please.
Just for those that maybe don't directly recall the conversation we had about why this matters so much, like 5 or 6 months ago, there are entire states where the only things cities get to do are the things that were delegated to them by the legislature in their state, which is a completely different way of thinking as has been stated, it is not how it's done in Oregon. But there are entire states, I think Arizona is a good, I believe is a good example. It's been used as a bad example of not good local governance for this reason. But just think about how important that concept is. If maybe you didn't recall it from 6 months ago, just a reminder.
Thanks, Jason. And Nathan, please.
I just thought I should say something because I was definitely one of the people who early on in the process thought I wanted a preamble to say something, but I haven't prepared enough for this topic, I will say, for tonight. But from what I'm thinking at the moment, I definitely also have that conflict between, okay, I want to say something, but I don't want to say anything too specific that it, ties us down or it excludes someone or anything like that. I guess the most important thing for me in saying any sort of a preamble is establishing a we. So it's not just, oh, we're just a bunch of individuals who happen to live next to each other, but we're a community. Whatever those values are is less important to me maybe, but it's just a, this is your document, this is your community. We're a we. By living here, you're part of a we.
Thank you, Nathan. That's really great. Karen, please.
Hearing the conversation about the home rule made me reread the Beavertons. I feel like we are doing all of this work for more than just claiming home rule. And rereading that sentence just makes it sound like that's why we're doing it. So I guess I'm intrigued by the phrases promote the general welfare and establish justice. And it seems like part of what might have come up in those individual sessions was acknowledging the value of every person in the city. So it seems like there is room for a value or two that isn't restrictive or would change in the future. But I hope we're doing this work more than just to declare home rule.
Thank you, Karen. Jeanette, please.
Yeah, I have no problem putting the home rule in there, and there are exemptions like land use regulations. We have a state buildings code that's preempt cities from doing more than they actually would want to do, but I would have no problem with that. And if we could come up with a bit of language to extend it to Karen's point, that would be fine too.
Thank you, Jeanette. And Tony, please.
I kind of like maybe the idea of combining the simplicity and the brevity of the Oregon introduction, and then following up with the home rule. So that it is a little bit beefier, but I also would kind of like that, contrary to other input, I kind of would like to remove the voter language so that it is more inclusive for everybody, even the people that don't vote, because some people don't vote because of their convictions. And granted, they're excluding themselves from the process, but they're not excluding themselves from the community. So since this is going to the voters, the more the preamble is kind of like that it resonates with them, that these are the values that they have as a member of the state. And then also by mirroring the Oregon state language, even when you go down to Salem, you're starting out saying that we share the same values as members, as Oregonians. But for our city, rule and our city control, we do want to maintain our power. We're going to present our cases of our city, so that we're part of Oregon and we have our home rule also, so that we're kind of the cake and eat it too, I guess, but also just say, we're all on the same team. We just happen to live in different areas.
Yeah, I see that. It's interesting with the voters too. We have so many community members who are not able to vote. Either they are immigrants who have joined our community who aren't able to vote. They have felony convictions and aren't able to vote. They are under 18 and are not able to vote. So there are a lot of reasons why someone may not be a voting member of the community, but still be a fully fledged community member. Jason, please.
I think this is an important point, and as someone else was talking, I started to feel very compelled to maybe this whole thing starts with some sort of a statement that we are a community of people, and then it goes on. Like it sort of is very broad, and it starts with an acknowledgement that what is distinct is our sense of community. And then all some of the timeless values that are being discussed, and then talk about home rule or something like that. But I think starting it with some sort of a, we are a collective community of people, or whatever the right words are, but that concept would be how I would feel like that's how our community functions and how it feels about itself.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I had that started to write down in my notes, underlining every time community has come up just in this conversation, and then in how many other conversations that we've had where we've talked about how important community is. I mean, even just talking about like how long someone should live in the city before being able to run for elected office, and really being a member of the community, and how important that value has come up all the time in this group. And so establishing that, I think, from the first sentence of the charter is an excellent suggestion. Thank you. Zachary, please.
Yeah, I think of voters and I think of how y'all should vote, but I know there are limitations in place, and sometimes it doesn't always happen. So I understand, and if it's better to people's feelings and stuff, I would be willing to change it to community, or like, we the community of Tigard want to ensure, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't want it to be like the we the people, because I don't want it to like copy the US Constitution, because I feel like it wouldn't be as original for Tigard to do that. So just something different, but not like too different.
All right, so no we the people, but we are a community. So what I'm hearing, I've heard some pretty general agreement, is a desire to claim home rule, but not to only do that in the charter preamble, and then to reflect in some way that Tigard is a community, and what kind of community may mean. And I also heard establishing value of every individual. That's come up actually a few times in the past 6 months of our conversations. How do folks feel about some language that speaks to that in a preamble? Okay, so these ideas of community, establishing value of every individual, and claiming home rule. Carol, please.
Could we use the word equity in there somehow?
We can try. Equity is one of those words that everyone has a very different definition of what that one means. Jeanette, please.
Yeah, thanks, Carol, for bringing that up. I love the idea, but equity is some people are calling it whitewashing, BIPOC washing. I mean, it's unfortunately the term has just lost its meaning, and that was originally what I was referring to. In 30, 40 years, will people look back and say, what does equity mean? And I would hate for us to include something that doesn't stand strong for decades.
Thank you, Jeanette. Much better said than me. Zachary, please.
I'd like the word, like the meaning of equity, but I know we can't use it. So I would think of using like equality, or some sort of like common defense, or like justice language.
We'll work on kind of still, let's keep this still, I guess, the concept level, but we'll work on some options and kind of bring a preamble back, draft preamble back to this group, like we've done with other sections. I think just trying to get to these overall concepts. Anything else that sticks out to folks for a preamble? Okay. So, you guys did a lot of work today. Tony, please.
Hey, sorry about that. I was clicking around.
No worries.
I think, I think you're already on that page, but I think the kind of the bullet point buzzwords for me that I would like to see are that justice, order, liberty, and then community. I think that those are, to me, my big bullet point words in the draft language that I would like to see, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Thanks, Tony. All right, well, we will have a draft preamble and we can continue this discussion at our next meeting when we have more of that information. Zachary, please.
I think safety, I mean, I didn't really say this exactly, so maybe I misinterpreted the question, but I feel like safety is really important and that should be our #1 focus for next time, hopefully, because, you know, a lot of what's been changing in Oregon politics and stuff, I think making sure we have enough change going on that's helpful to our community and what our community wants, especially at the police department reform and all that, is very important. So some sort of note of that in our charter could be really helpful.
Yeah, I haven't heard actually safety come up from this group at all really in the last 6 months as a concept. So I'm gonna push back on that one as a value that's really, well, it definitely resonates with a lot of folks in the public right now. I'm not sure that that's something that this group has really discussed as a core concept. Thank you. Okay. So looking at just 2 more meetings, we will come back to the preamble, but more importantly, one of the from way back in February, this idea of fees, how fees are established, how the city uses fees. And so we're going to have a presentation from our budget officer, is that the title? And city manager next meeting, so on August 7th, talking about fees. As well as some examples about kind of how some cities have used very specific provisions in charters to limit very specific fees. And so you can look forward to that. And then on August 14th, we'll do finishing touches. But between now and August 7th, we will have an updated charter for you, and it's going to look like a really finished charter because it almost is, which is just incredible. Margaret, please.
Well, this is just kind of a closing thing, is that I've really appreciated not only how you and Shelby have taken a lot of what we've said and translated it back into words, but also the input of the committee and the entire charter review committee. I think it's been very, very helpful, and it's really covered. I think the citizens of Tigard would be kind of proud because we're talking at all different angles and we're looking at all different views, and I've really appreciated that. So thank all of you.
Absolutely. John, please.
Yeah, when there's fees, to me, the local ones to look at would be Sherwood for their fee structures. They put restrictions on fees. And then I know Gresham has one just related to, I think, public safety and some other ones. I know some other local ones have that too, but Sherwood's is a lot more extensive than that. So if you're going to pick local ones, I would prefer that you at least pull those up.
Thank you. I will. All right, so fees and preamble, and then we'll be wrapping up our charter. So look forward to a charter shell. This is one of your last opportunities to let us know what is still confusing, what doesn't make sense before we wrap up our work and to take it on the road. So have a great night, everybody. Try to stay cool, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.